Great. We have people arriving. Super. Hello. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Tonight we are talking about how to use clean energy in order to enable more of it. We're delighted to have Dr. Ron Sinton, founder and president and senior scientist at Sinton Instruments. And on his website and also the whenrenewable.com website, you will be able to locate a charging forecast that I believe he'll be referencing some tonight. Now I will move to the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge with respect as non-native people that the land on which we stand, live, and learn is the traditional territory of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. Let us seek to understand what it means to be in right relationship today with the traditional stewards of this land and with the land itself and with all the creatures that inhabit it. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker this evening, Dr. Ron Sinton. He is a Coloradan who got his PhD working on high-efficiency silicon solar cells at Stanford, and then became a founding member of the PV company SunPower. Ron then founded Sinton Instruments in 1992, which manufactures electronic equipment in Boulder, Colorado, for the entire international solar cell manufacturing industry. In recent years, Ron has also worked in modeling 100% renewable systems and has testified as an expert witness for environmental groups at the Colorado Public Utilities Commission, advocating for low-cost clean energy. Welcome, Ron. Thank you so much for being our guest tonight.
Thank you very much. Okay, this is a story about solar, wind, coal, how we use electricity, hourly renewable forecast, informed choice, and tonight I'm going to talk about how to shortcut directly from consumer choice to cleaner energy without necessarily going through the regulatory process. And to do this, I'm going to talk first about the grid that we have in Colorado, and then hourly renewable availability, and then how customers can enable clean, lowest cost energy just by choosing to use it. And in this process, I'm going to talk about 3 new tools that we have available that can really put customers in control. First, I'll talk about the grid. And by the grid, what I'll be referring to is Public Service Company of Colorado Balancing Area, which we call Xcel here in Colorado. Here I'm showing generation on the vertical axis versus year. And we have nearly 50% renewable electricity right now. At the latest count for year to date, I'm finding 49.5%. We can see the trend in fossil fuel in black and in renewable in blue. And I put PV on here to highlight that in the middle of the year of 2023, we installed a lot of utility scale PV, and this really changed the nature of the grid. Going into a little more detail, I'll show 2-week averages of the different sources of electricity for these years. And wind gives the most renewable electricity, shown here in blue. And of course, it's weather dependent. Gas is also weather dependent in the sense that whenever wind drops, the gas has to pick up to carry the load. And when wind is high, gas is low. Coal has been in consistent decline since 2022 for 2 reasons. One, by design, we've been retiring power plants. We've retired Comanche 1. And second, because Comanche 3 has gone offline several times. This was for a boiler replacement here. And then at the end of the year, it's because it's been down since August for an unspecified problem that they'll try to fix by next June. I saved the best for last because I'm a solar person. This shows the PV coming online in the middle of 2023. But what really astounds me is to see that PV is beating out coal going into the darkest days of 2025. That's just amazing. Next, I want to talk about renewable availability hour by hour, and this is even more interesting. I'll start with sunshine, and I'm showing here the length of the day from NOAA data. And this is early morning on January 1st, and then you have sunrise, noon, sunset, midnight. And when you stack 365 days together, you get the length of daytime throughout the calendar year. And we can see that days are short in January, long in June, short again in December. So if we look at the electricity coming from solar, of course it has this shape. There's no surprise here. There are some clouds and it's brighter in the middle of the day, but no surprises. So this is showing green energy. If we add the wind in, and I'm showing this as percent renewable electricity of the total load, we can see that daytime is still brighter because it has both wind and solar. But I want to especially point out the zebra stripes during the nighttime hours. And for example, this black stripe here are several nights in a row where we had almost 100% fossil generated power. These are when the wind is calm. And then you can have nights with lots of wind when the energy is very clean at night. Another characteristic to point out is that we have an air conditioning peak in the summertime in the afternoon and evening. And this is actually when the grid is designed for, because these are the highest peak hours of the year, and this determines how many combustion turbines you have to build. But when I look at this map here, what I see is that it's not as green as I would have anticipated. If you had come to Empower Hour that I gave almost 4 years ago, I would have projected this map for this year with daytime being quite a bit greener than what we're actually seeing in practice. And what I didn't know about 4 years ago, what I didn't take into account fully, is that we're always burning coal until 2031 anyway. It's destructive and expensive to totally cycle coal plants completely on and off. And so they just stay on. They don't back off in the middle of the day to allow all the solar that's available to shine. And so when coal, solar, and wind are competing, it's the wind and the solar that are turned off or exported. They're considered in excess, and the coal continues to run. Once you understand this dynamic, you realize that there's a lot more excess renewables when you have a 50% average renewables than you would think. And you can go back and look at the EIA data and use a model and figure out that these are the hours in bright green where we have excess renewables on the grid. And this was for 2024 data. And the significance of this is that in these green hours, when we have excess renewables, if you flip a switch or plug in an EV, it can be charged on 100% renewable electricity, 100% clean. And this is because that is in excess, and you can use the excess electricity that otherwise would be wasted to charge your car or light your light. So when you have this map like this, it's extremely useful because you can test different different ideas for using renewable better. And this is what I'm done here. And what you can see is during peak hours, which are the most expensive under a time of use rate, 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., it's not only the most expensive, but it's using fossil fuel 70% of the time. Night is a little better. Daytime is good. Windy nights are great, and sunny days are amazing. And so this is a really good tool to use historical emissions data to design clean energy strategies. But if you want to implement these strategies, what you would really like to know is which hours tomorrow, maybe Thursday, Friday, Saturday, are going to be clean. And utilities know this because for a long time, they've been using detailed weather forecast data. They know exactly where their wind turbines are placed in their solar power plants. And so they can convert this weather forecast of sun and wind into power and do a 7-day ahead renewable forecast. And as an example of how long this has been around, I found this textbook, which is from 2014, and it's edited by a scientist here in Boulder at NCAR. And a chapter in it is a collaboration between Xcel and NCAR to use the weather forecast to help run the grid. And so I got interested in this about the same time, 10 years ago, and started asking Xcel if we could get this to be made public. And eventually, I suppose I was agitating. So when I noticed that a publicly available forecast came out from SPP Weiss, which is an area that includes Xcel and is a little bit bigger, we jumped on it. And what we did is develop an algorithm using wind, solar, rooftop solar, and load to come up with a public-facing, hopefully useful and friendly depiction of the ideal EV charging hours. And I had pointed out those zebra stripes, the very dirty nights. And so perhaps the first thing to notice here are that it specifies the nights to avoid. And these are the dark nights. And you can see that it really makes a difference. If you charged during daytime on Saturday, you could be using 100% renewables. 8 or 10 hours later, it's 15% renewables. It's almost entirely fossil fuel. So the PUC ordered Xcel to do a similar forecast about 18 months ago. This was pushed over the line at the PUC by the city of Boulder. So thank you, Boulder. But Xcel chose to use kind of a stoplight motif. So red means stop using power. And here we have the early morning hours on Monday at about 12% renewable. And you can see that we show that as a lull in the renewables. When the sun comes out, it's green for go ahead, use renewables. During the middle of the day, you can see that Thursday, Friday, Saturday, during the middle of the day, a good time to use renewables. So these are showing about the same thing. They're coming from different data sources. The one that we're using is a bit independent of Xcel, and we don't have a good explanation for exactly what this means quite yet. I'm working on it. So where do we fit in as customers? Well, we are the load. We demand power, and this gives us some agency to affect where this power comes from. This is because customers choose which power plants get built. This is an NREL study for the entire US grid. It's not just for Colorado. And they found that if you're forecasting that you're going to add load during night and you run the capacity expansion modeling to plan power plants, the power plants that get built are fossil fuel. If you add load during all 24 hours, you get a combination of wind and solar, but mostly fossil fuel. If you add load during daytime, you get wind and solar. So let's take some examples. Xcel is forecasting that EVs on the grid will charge mostly at night during peak hours. And so this would encourage the installation of fossil fuel. I'm looking at data centers as an example of something that's 24 hours. And this can use some renewables, but a lot of fossil fuel. And anything that we can synchronize with renewables, for example, daytime for PV, will encourage the installation of future wind and PV. Just to look at the stakes, how big an effect this is, EVs are the biggest power growth in the residential sector until 2030. This was in Xcel's projections. They're projecting 446 megawatts of EV charging during peak hours in 2030. Now, are we really going to charge our EVs this way? All the EVs that we buy between now and 2030, or will people adapt to a renewable grid? So in my dream, we all charge EVs on clean energy starting now. This shows up in the meter data now, which we can immediately send to the PUC, and this results in more PV and wind in the resource plans. This would be the ideal. But in any case, the EVs that are participating in this scheme are immediately cleaner. So it's a twofer. Now is the time to prove this out. And I'm saying that because obstacles to using renewables have been removed. We have new time of use rates since November 1st, and the peak hours got moved later into the evening to 5 to 9 p.m. And the other 20 hours are all at discounted rates. We even have some discounts for off-peak EV charging during these 20 hours. So what we can do is identify the cleanest hours using the forecast or just the average, which is to say that the cleanest hours are during daytime. Now, I want to spend about 3 slides here talking about why we wanted to shift the hours from early afternoon into peak hours of 5 to 9 p.m. And to do this, I'll talk a little history. The time of use rate that we had until November 1st was designed in 2019 in a PUC proceeding, and they used 2022 data. And the data that they used was the 1,000 highest hours of fossil fuel dispatch. And the reason you do that is those are the hours when the grid is stressed. This is where you have to build power plants for. It's the high cost hours of the grid. And this is a frequency distribution versus the hour of the day. And you can see that of these 1,000 hours, 110 of them were at 5 p.m. This is the peak stress on the grid in 2022. But you have a distribution that kind of starts at 1 in the afternoon and goes till 9 p.m. And so they decided on high rates from 1 to 3 in the afternoon, highest rates from 3 till 7 in the afternoon. And for some of the commercial rates, they kept rates high all the way till 9. So they covered all these key hours to try and reduce the grid stress and the cost of the grid. So let's see what happens when you install all that PV that came in 2023. And we have that here, and it just took the reliability risk right out of daytime because the air conditioning peaks are now being served by all the new PV electricity. You can see that there is no reliability problem, very little reliability problem in the early afternoon. So we no longer have to penalize people with high prices during the afternoon. And as we go into the future, this is 2030, it becomes even more clear that the hours with the least reliability problems with respect to generation are the daytime hours. And just to push on this point a little more, we actually have excess renewables during daytime. This is because of both the rooftop and the utility scale PV. And what I'm showing here is that as soon as this PV went in July 23rd, this is a year of data from Xcel, and I plotted it as megawatts per hour of curtailed electricity. This is renewables that actually have to be turned off because we can't use them all, versus hour of the day. And this is an average, and it's for 2 seasons. October through May is 8 months. What Xcel calls the summer season is 4 months. But for those 8 months, most of the year, we have excess renewables from 7 in the morning till 6 at night. In the summertime, it's a little bit shorter window from 7 in the morning to about 2 in the afternoon. And the vast majority of these excess renewables are in the low-cost hours. So we find that a time of use rate which was designed to lower the cost of the grid and improve reliability is actually very compatible with using clean energy. It's not a trade-off. We can do both. As an example, I like to look at specific days, and this was a day when our grid was 52% renewable, September 1st of 2025. And on this day, we had very little wind at night, so we had 15% renewable at night. But the wind and PV during the day was in excess, so we were actually curtailing. And I'd point out that even if we doubled the renewables on the grid, we would only increase the use of renewables from 15 to 30% at night, and it would have no effect during the day because we already have an excess. But let's contrast that to if we took an EV that was going to charge on fossil fuel at night and instead charge on the excess renewables during daytime. This EV is 100% effective at reducing fossil fuel emissions from the grid. It comes at no cost because you're using the battery you already have. You were already going to charge it. You can do this now. You don't have to wait for a program or an incentive or anything else. So we should do this first. This is extremely effective. And once we do this, it actually enables the use of more power because you have less curtailment on this day. You can also do the same thing with battery storage. You could charge your battery during the clean hours, discharge it at night to replace this fossil fuel. This works great, but it costs money because batteries are not cheap. And also, there's a 15% power loss. Batteries actually consume electricity. Now, I had some questions on this point the last time I gave a talk, so I put in an extra slide just to illustrate this. And in the 2021 resource plan, PV was bid into the plan at about 2.8 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, if I take the cost of batteries from the latest NREL study in 2025, and I calculate the cost of charging the battery on this PV, you need about 15% extra PV to cover the efficiency losses, and then the cost of the battery. The electricity from PV stored in a battery and then put on the grid is about 15.4 cents per kilowatt hour. So the batteries work great, but they're expensive. And so it's pretty clear that if we want the lowest cost clean energy, we should try and use as much of the energy in exactly the moment that it's generated, daytime for PV or windy nights for wind, and then use batteries only as necessary as backup. Now, how flexible are real people in their power use? Can we make this easy? Kind of set it and forget it? And my answer is yes, and I'll try and convince you here. The first example I'm going to use is reducing emissions from cars. And on this axis, I'm showing tons of CO2 per year. And the first example is a gas car. It emits about 5 tons of CO2 per year by burning gasoline. If you swap this car out for an EV and you charged it at 9 p.m. from Xcel's grid, you'd reduce these emissions to about a third, and these are now grid emissions. If you charge this same car, for example, on a timer at 10 a.m., you'd reduce these emissions by a factor of 7. So it makes a huge difference when you charge your EV. Xcel has what they call managed charging programs, where you plug in, for example, at night, and they charge your car during the best hours. And when you unplug in the morning, it's ready to go. And these plans can be better. For example, if you charge at night, this is actually pretty good emissions reduction. If you charge during the day, it's excellent. This is great. I've got a future program that I'd like to propose in a few slides, but first let's talk about fuel cost. For the gas car, it costs about $1,200 a year to run your gasoline car. If you use these managed charging programs at Xcel, it's $330 a year is my estimate from the low cost hours on the time of use plan. Plus there's a $150 a year incentive to sign up for these programs. So you'll end up paying about $180 a year for your fuel. That's a savings of $1,000 a year. Now let's look at the signal that you're sending up to the system. If you're buying $1,200 of gasoline, you're clearly supporting oil companies to go forward into the future. If you're charging your EV at 9 p.m., you're incentivizing wind, gas, and batteries because these are the things that would supply that energy at 9 p.m. If you're charging at 10 a.m., you're incentivizing a future for PV. And these programs that synchronize power use to renewables, to the extent that they're successful, really incentivize wind and PV. Now I'm going to talk about this program that I would propose. And the idea of this is that if you have an EV with a 70 kilowatt battery, 70 kilowatt hour battery, which is pretty typical, that's about a 280 mile range now, and you specify to the utility, for example, that you need a 70% minimum charge after every session, which is a 200 mile range at a minimum. And then you plug in this car every night, let's say. Then when you unplug it, typically it would have 247 miles. It could have as much as 280. It could have as little as 200. But in the background, what's happening is that the network knows when it's clean and it knows when it's dirty, and it charges more on clean nights and less on dirty nights to optimize your use of clean energy. So to the user, this is set it and forget it. You plug it in, you unplug it, you usually have 247 miles of range, but your emissions have been reduced almost to be negligible. If you do this during daytime, it is actually negligible because there's so much clean energy, and there are very few days when you would have the lowest 200-mile range. Now, I'll point out that we can clearly do this. This takes some technology, might take some time. It would work through Xcel, for example. But if you just plugged in your car at 10 a.m. every morning and chose not to plug it in if it was snowy and rainy, you would approach this great result. You could do the same thing at night if you plug your car in at night, but check the EV charging forecast to see if it's a windy or a calm night. and didn't plug it in on the calm nights, you could approach this great result. And so it's both something that you could do today or could be done painlessly in the future. So there are other ways to use clean power. We could organize more daytime charging opportunities like workplace charging, public charging. This could be done at a city level. It's another way for businesses to participate. We could focus on energy efficiency that's really focused on the peak hour use. Things like shading west windows, having tight insulated houses. When your air conditioner dies, you could replace it with an energy efficient heat pump, for example, and the return on investment is a lot faster under the time of use rates. Electric water heaters can be timed. They're actually similar to EVs for potential for this, and they're thermal batteries. They've been used for a long time to store energy, and you can uh, you can heat the water with clean energy. You could adjust the thermostat a bit during 5 to 9 p.m. You could just be careful not to waste electricity by, for example, running air conditioning when you're not in the house. And then you can do a lot of really simple, small things like do a few more loads of laundry on the weekend or outside of the peak hours. I think people will start to do a little bit of this as soon as they're aware that there's a difference, that you can actually make a difference. The bottom line is that EVs, air conditioning, electric resistance water heaters, and dryers matter for how much power they use. Most of the other things don't matter very much, and you don't have to worry about them. Things not to do, in my opinion, would be don't set a timer for 9 p.m. when the window goes low, because this could create a new peak hour. You could ask yourself, would 11:45 work, 2:15 a.m.? Spread the load, set your timer to start the washing machine in the middle of the night, to start charging your EV at some random time when nobody else is likely to be doing it. For the same reason, don't move power from this 5 to 9 window into the adjacent 4 p.m. window unless you have to, because this could make it a new peak hour. And third, don't stress about using power when you really need it. I would set habits that painlessly accomplish your goals most of the time. Perfection could be the enemy of the good here. It's really easy to be cleaner with your power. It's, of course, hard to be perfect, so don't worry about it. Xcel, in their annual report for their transportation electrification plans, is starting to show some EV charging data for when the cars are actually charging under their programs. They don't do an hourly assessment of emissions, but we could. And we can see here, just briefly, that workplace charging is good because it's during day. The public charging, a lot of it is good, but people are out and about at night and they are charging. The home charging, shown here in blue, is basically a 9 p.m. timer peak. And we know we can do a lot better than that, and it should be easy. The third tool that I want to mention here is the advanced meters that we have now. These were installed in order to do the time of use rates, so they've been phased in over the last 3 or 4 years. And we can access these from our Xcel accounts and download the data, even down to a 15-minute resolution. But what I find is most useful is every hour of the day for a year. This is a very powerful tool going forward, and we need to start using it. I'm going to show just a few examples of what this data can show you. This is for a suburban house with gas heat, air conditioning. It has very young children that are at home 7 days a week. So every day you would expect to be the same. But when I looked at this data, summer weekends look like this, with an air conditioning peak. Summer weekdays, when the time of use was in effect from 1 to 7, shows this 6-hour notch. These people are very serious about their time of use, and they save significant money by doing this. This shows you what is possible. Here's another example. This is a 1974 house. It has rooftop solar, electric hot water, gas heat, an induction range, air conditioning, an EV charge during daytime, and I'm showing the 2024 data here. The EV is clearly 100% clean because they charge it during daytime when their solar array is making power. But the main thing to see here is that this house is not using a lot of electricity, but it's producing a lot of electricity. It's actually producing more from its PV rooftop array than it's using. This is summer, but in this case, it was true for the entire year. And so this homeowner decided to install a cold climate heat pump when the AC died. And so he replaced the air conditioning and the gas heat with a cold climate heat pump. And the point is here that we'll see what this did for his house immediately. This was very recent that the cold climate heat pump was installed. So when we look at the data from December and January of this year and compare it to December and January of last year, we'll see immediately the results from installing the heat pump. And probably this data can be used to tune it up to be lower cost or higher performance. So why do I like this customer choice approach? Well, first, we don't need permission. We can do this right now. It will be very effective very quickly. Progress can be easily tracked because we have the meters and we also have the hourly grid emissions, so we can track our emissions and progress in this. The price is right. It's free. We don't need subsidies to do this. So this is perfect for the existing political climate federally that we have. When we align to have renewable friendly power use, we enable more future renewables. I often am an expert witness at the PUC for Colorado Renewable Energy Society. And so I have experience with that. And putting things through kind of the 5-year decision cycle is slow, complicated, and going through the utility usually ends up being expensive. So I find these things to be extremely attractive. So I started with this graphic, and I'd like to point out that most of this we can do on our own accord. We can align some of our power use with clean sources, and when we do this, it actually results in a future that is much cleaner. It will also impact the utility proceedings. And the way that it does this is that we're going to have customer-informed data, independent of the utility basically kind of cherry-picking, selectively putting data into the proceedings that mostly supports their case. So this will change the entire process and speed it up. But mostly, I think that we could take satisfaction from doing something and seeing an immediate result. So that's what I brought tonight. I'd like to thank especially Adrian Carpin, who worked on the EV charging forecast and maintains it, and also the Empower Hour team, especially for inviting me back to give this talk tonight, but also for the enthusiasm that they show to try and get this message out and see if we can make some substantial progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ron. We really appreciate this, and I know we'll have a lot of questions already come. We have some already coming in. One on this, the first one is on the slide showing the September 1st, 2025 energy profile. Why is there gas generation when renewables are being curtailed?
So I think there are a lot of reasons for that, but the main one is that we don't know how to run grids that are 100% renewable right now. Colorado doesn't have hydro and it doesn't have nuclear. And so when we're running entirely on solar and wind, we have no rotating machines. And the way that we know how to run big grids is with the rotating machines because they have an inertia that keeps the grid stable. So Colorado is basically a bit of an island. And I would guess that Xcel is not comfortable running the grid with less rotating machines than this at this time. The solution to this is what they call grid forming inverters, and they're used for small grids successfully. For example, in Hawaii, they haven't been tested on big grids. So it's rather typical that a grid does not exceed 70% of inverter-based technologies like solar and wind. Some grids can report 100% renewables, but when you look at them, they're exporting 30% of the renewables so that they can keep some rotating machines going. So you can say you're 100% on a net basis, but you usually find rotating machines. And this is probably part of the story for why Spain went down, is that they were flirting with having a lot of solar and wind on the grid without many spinning machines.
Mhm.
And so you need experience running the grid that way, and people are still experimenting on that.
Mhm. Great. That's very helpful. Thank you. Another question, does this forecast that you're uh, showing for on your website, does that forecast help for non-Excel, non-public service territory consumers like folks in Longmont?
Absolutely. This is actually from SPP Weiss, Western Energy Imbalance Service Market. And so that includes most of Wyoming. It probably includes most of the generators that you're talking about because many of them are in the Xcel balancing area. Xcel is responsible for balancing the region. And so anything that is in the same region as Xcel, SPP Weiss, will be seeing this same weather, and their grid has to balance with ours. And so this is very relevant for all of the eastern range, the Front Range in Colorado.
That's terrific. That's really exciting to hear that. Another question, um, this one from Leslie. In the always burning coal slide, why don't we see less coal after August 12th, 2025, when Pueblo Unit 3 went offline?
Okay, that's a great question. It's because this is 2024 data that I used for most of this slideshow. And so we see Comanche 3 offline in March when it got its boiler replacement.
Great.
I don't have this slide in this deck, but starting in August this year, it looks pretty much like this right up until now.
Mhm. Okay. Another one, this is from Scott Miller. Thank you very much, Ron. And did the higher time of view rates when they were 1 to 3 p.m. and 3 to 7 p.m. have any impact on user behavior? Did it shift any usage from the higher cost hours to the lower cost hours? And if so, how much?
So there wasn't a ton of data. When they did this last time of use proceeding,
Mhm.
the the original time of use plan was still rolling out. And so they didn't have great statistics and they didn't see a lot of shift. Why I think that we may see a lot more now is that when you're asking people not to use their air conditioner on the hottest day of the year, uh, that's a tough slog.
Mm.
When you're asking someone to start charging their EV an hour later and they're not going to notice the difference in the morning, you could see a huge shift.
Mhm.
So I think as we go down the road of beneficial electrification with our our transportation, with our heat, with all of these new appliances that have flexibility, I think that people will be able to shift a lot more power.
Mhm.
So I think there are good reasons for optimism.
Mhm.
The short answer is they did not see a lot of shift,
Mhm.
but some other programs have seen the shift. So
Yeah.
it was a bit too early, probably.
Uh-huh. So you see these things as evolving and being positive.
Yeah, I see it as, for example, if you set down the rules, then people will be aware of them on the very first day they buy the EV.
Hmm.
And there's no incentive for anyone to design things to shift power if
Hmm.
there's not a price signal.
Yeah.
So you have to put the price signal out there and then see what comes of it.
Uh-huh. Great. Another question. Do you know if all publicly available EV chargers, for example, at museum garages, Fraser Meadows, large multifamily residences, use the same time of use rates?
They don't use the exact same time of use rate, but in the proceeding, most of the rates got realigned a little bit. So commercial, secondary, general, they got realigned. So we'll see if that filters down to the chargers or how fast it does. Eventually, I would imagine that it would get down there. I mean, there are also marketing reasons to price stuff. Price is not the cost. So if a venue wants to attract people by having EV chargers, they they may charge a price that does that. Just like gas stations can charge low prices for gas if they think they're going to sell stuff in the store. So I don't know.
Another one from Scott Miller. How do the Xcel charging perks programs reduce CO2 emissions compared to charging your EV at home at the same times on your own?
Well, the result in those two cases would be the same.
Okay.
Uh, if if your the Xcel signal is actually based on what is good for the grid, which might be a little different than maximizing renewables. But when there are a lot of renewables, there's low priced electricity and you're not running the fossil fuels. So the two coincide pretty well.
Hmm.
The charging perks might focus a little more on the low demand hours
Hmm.
in addition to the most renewable hours.
Hmm. Okay. A vote of confidence and appreciation for your application on your website versus Excel. This comment is the Excel data for every hour of the year is too much for the average consumer. Um, and then a question for the slide that showed EVs using 446 megawatt hours, how much impact on the grid is that? And how many gas peaker plants?
Well, I think that you would once we once we shut down the coal,
Uh-huh.
it will be mostly gas turbines, and batteries.
Okay.
Um, so I don't know the exact mix,
Hmm.
but both batteries are kind of the new combustion turbine as far as utilities go, in the sense that they're high capital cost up front and they don't produce much power the over the year.
Hmm.
So both go directly into the rate base. They're kind of similar that way.
Okay. A question, and if you could give some clarification on some of the acronyms here, that would be helpful. This
Please.
question says the NTP median costs do not show high costs for solar and storage that you have calculated. $50 per megawatt hour, about 5.8 cents per kilowatt hour for solar and storage median price. The loss of the tax credits will increase that, but not likely to get the 15 cents per kilowatt hour that your slide showed. Please comment.
Okay. The issue that they are talking about is that Xcel talks about solar and storage, but they don't say how much storage.
Hmm.
And so what I'm showing here is if you use 100% PV when it's generated, and in this case, if you use 100% of this power that's been stored in the battery and then goes back to the grid.
Hmm.
If your solar plus storage only stores 10% of the available power during the daytime, then you'd be 10% of the difference between these two,
Uh-huh.
10% higher. If you were storing 50%, you might be 50% higher.
Uh-huh.
So that's the difference.
Okay,
Um,
that's
that
helpful.
the Excel data is very mysterious
Mhm.
because some of those bids probably had a little storage and some of those bids had a lot.
Uh-huh. Mhm. So, next question. Could the city of Boulder, EcoCycle, via delivery companies, et cetera, set up automatic charging for their EV fleets?
Fleets are an interesting case because they're professionally run.
Hmm.
Um, and so, and they also probably have big interconnects for the charging. So they have all the infrastructure. But on the other hand, they're on a pretty fixed schedule.
Hmm.
There are hours when they're out on the road and hours when they need to charge.
Hmm.
So there are a lot of fleets of light EVs in Holland where they're managing them around the grid. But I think each one is different. You know, school buses have their schedule,
Hmm.
trash trucks have their schedule. So there's a lot of potential there, but you have to look at each special case.
Uh-huh. Great, thank you. Here's a comment and a question from Alan Best. He says, it keeps getting better and better, Ron. Do you know, has Excel produced any estimates of how much load that EVs now constitute?
Yes, they have total megawatts. It looks like it peaks at about 250 megawatts at 9 p.m.
Hmm. Great, thank you. Um, Here's a question from Scott Miller. What are the blockers to changing consumer behavior? What does it take to make consumer choice efforts scale in a way that changes the peak from 5 to 9 p.m. in the summer with AC to all day in the winter heat pumps to eventually flattening the curve?
So I think that's what we have to figure out.
Mhm.
I can figure out what's possible, but um, customers are have their own minds.
Okay.
And so I think, you know, the people at Empower Our Future are enthusiastic to give it a try and get the word out, you know, find the right avenues, find the ones that don't work. I think it's an adventure. but it would be too bad not to try.
Okay, thank you.
Scott Miller is asking has Xcel considered an EV charging program which charges 0 per kilowatt hour for EV charging that occurs when there is excess PV electricity?
I haven't heard anything to that in that way. Xcel has very low fixed charges, and so it's covering a lot of its fixed charges for distribution, transmission in the rates. So I think it would be more difficult for Xcel to do that than for some utilities that have a large fixed charge and then they add and then they have relatively low kilowatt hour charges. So I don't see that in the very near future. I would like to see a dynamic rate where the price of power was related to the cost of producing it, which could go down near zero and up during the peak hours. The the time of use is kind of a crude tool to have a fixed 4 hours rather than just telling you when you need to use less power more specifically.
Okay, thank you. And Chris Hoffman is asking whether you'd like to comment on Xcel's comparison tool.
Yeah, Xcel has a comparison tool where it tells you what your if you used electricity exactly as you did last year, whether you would pay more or less on the new time of use rates versus flat rates. And it has some problems in the sense that if you shifted your energy exactly as you were supposed to last year and shifted your power use to 7 p.m., then the rate comparison tool would penalize you for using extra power during the 7 and 8 o'clock hours. So the way they implemented the tool is not very sophisticated, and it could give a lot of people, especially the people that were following their instructions last year, the wrong answer and kick them onto the flat rates. So I would be a little bit skeptical. And when you get a result, consider if there's something that you can shift. For example, by my calculations, the time of use rate will save you about $100 per EV per year. So if you have one EV, $100 discount on the time of use rate. If you have two, $200. If you have an electric water heater that could be flexible, it could be a similar amount. So there are some obvious things that you can optimize, and I would do the thought experiment about optimizing them before you shift on to the flat rates. There was a meeting last week, and not that many people are choosing the flat rates so far. And it could be just general apathy that no one is using their comparison tool, or it could be that people are making good choices. But the time of use rate is a plan to shave the peak. It is a plan to keep EVs out of peak hours to cut the cost of the grid. So I think people on this call should be inclined to try and make it work because it's there for the right reasons.
Great tips. So Paul Cullen is asking what happens to the excess renewable generation?
So in that graph that I showed for curtailed power, it's simply turned off. You just turn your wind power plant down or your solar power plant. So it's, in a sense, it's wasted. Um, Curtailment is not necessarily bad because in an optimized grid, you have excess power during part of the year just to ensure that you have enough on the days that you need it. So it can often be the cheapest way to run a grid by building enough renewables for the worst day. So curtailment isn't necessarily bad, but it's definitely an opportunity to use more renewable power if we can align our power use better with it.
Great. And Mary has put a question here too, and she says, we know that our audience is generally pretty energy focused. So understanding that this will be skewed potentially. Wondering, any attendees are inspired to shift their usage? Anyone have suggestions? For example, I have learned about delaying running my dishwasher. So I don't know if there are people out there in the Q&A who let us know what you're thinking about. And Julia now says, did your battery cost example refer to charging batteries with potentially curtailed renewable power?
Okay, so that's a good question. And the price signal is not there. So there's no advantage to charging batteries with potentially curtailed power right now, other than wanting to be greener. There's no economic advantage because you don't pay less for your grid just because there's curtailment in that hour.
Okay,
Did that make sense?
yes.
Okay.
Um, Looking for any other questions? If not, we'll thank our guest once again. And not seeing any, Ron, thank you. Thank you for staying after 7, and thank you for preparing such an informative presentation, and also for those who really know how much work you do behind the scenes in making a lot of this possible. So thank you on many levels.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Really appreciate your being with us here tonight. Um, I also want to take a moment to thank the other Empower Our Future communication team members who are integral to making these Empower Hours happen. They are Paul Cullen, Chris Hoffman, Steve Whitaker, and Julie Zonizer. It's kind of a work in process for sure, but we've been working on creating a public service announcement essentially about time of use and how to best use electricity. And so for the moment, if you use the QR code, I think that takes you to Ron's charging forecast at Sinton Instruments, which is totally fine. Eventually, that will be at whenrenewable.org and also .com. And we do eventually hope to create an app so that it's even easier to use, and so that data would keep getting updated dynamically.